Welcome to the biggest influences. This is 100% maybe the real Joe Rogan.
Voice.ai.
Now, let me go through a couple of cases. Do you mind?
Please.
All right. And the reason why I say this is because I talked to you earlier about that some UFOs, some UAP, I can't underline that word enough, represent or originate from a non-human intelligence. And I'm going to go through a handful of cases that I personally have looked into. These are cases that that could prove one way or the other, certainly make a very compelling argument that some of these objects. So let's start with 1945, Trinity. Jacques Vallée just wrote a book with a woman named Paula Harris. Fascinating case. I met two of the witnesses. I went to the landing site, the alleged crash site. Very compelling. There's probably military records on that if that's the case, according to the eyewitness testimony. That should be looked into. Roswell. Now, I know your audience is going to say, Roswell's been beaten to death. But how about this? Let's say that a murder took place, even though it's 80 years ago or 75 years ago. Does that make it like, oh, well, so much time's passed, let's not worry about it? No. And the reason why Roswell is so relevant that most people don't understand is that you had the 509th Bomb Squadron, the most elite squadron, hand select unit in the world, exclusively responsible for the deployment of atomic weapons, announced that they recovered a flying saucer. That's a fact. Okay. Then they recant and say, oh, terribly sorry. It was just a common everyday weather balloon. Jesse Marcel, the first person at the debris field with Mac Brazel, and thank you, Don Schmidt and Kevin Randall, for all your work. We wouldn't talk about this if it hadn't been for them, and Stanton Friedman. Mac Brazel takes Marcel and another guy, intelligence officer, out to the debris field. Mac Brazel says the material was clearly not of Earth origin. I know weather balloons inside and out. He described the material like tin foil that you crumple it up and it regains its thing. These I-beams that are purple with hieroglyphic writings, things of that nature. He takes it back to his son, who I met, Jesse Marcel Jr. I knew him well. Went on Larry King with the guy a bunch of times. He described the same material that he handled personally in his hands, okay? The press conference they had with Colonel DuBose, Roger Ramey, and Jesse Marcel, 2 out of 3 of those went on the record on camera, said the original story was true. That was the balloon story was a cover-up. Okay. You've got the FBI memo by J. Edgar Hoover in his own handwriting. He talks about in the SW case, could be Southwest, the Army grabbed it and wouldn't let us have it for cursory examination. That's pretty compelling. You've got Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who just so happened to grow up in Roswell. And when he came back, or on the outskirts, and when he came back from his mission to the moon in the 70s, Apollo 14, 6th man to walk on the moon, he gets back and he knows all those ranchers. And those ranchers tell him, yeah, that was not of Earth origin. He's gone on the record saying this. And he also confirmed that his intelligence sources, he's an astronaut, he landed on the moon, told him that Roswell was real. So based on just that alone, that's extremely compelling. And I know that Sheila Widnall, the former Secretary of the Air Force in the 90s under the Clinton administration, she went after that case because Clinton went after that case. And they weren't happy with the answers they were getting. And then the Air Force comes up with Project Mogul. Well, if you look at Project Mogul is just exactly the same explanation as the first one, except it's a bunch of these balloons stringed together. Balsa wood, tinfoil, absolute baloney. If the Air Force really wanted to squash it, show us that material that the first-hand eyewitness testimony, the people that have gone on camera described, show us that material that crumples up from 1947. Show us those I-beams with hieroglyphics.
Can I stop you real
Sure,
quick?
absolutely.
The material that crumpled up, what's fascinating is it's exactly the same as what was described in the Virginia case.
Yes, that's what Carlos de Souza described, yes.
This material was light, like aluminum foil. When you crumple it and let it go, it goes right back to its form.
Took back his shape, yes. So anyway, so that's Roswell.
So someone has this.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Supposedly.
And someone probably has photos of this, supposedly.
Yeah, there's a memo out that was found actually called the Wilson memo. Most researchers think it's a smoking gun. I've got it here, actually.
The Jackie Gleason.
Jackie Gleason's amazing. I met a guy who...
Nixon thing is wild.
Oh, absolutely. And Jackie Gleason told my buddy, Jeff Sagansky, don't listen to what anyone ever tells you. I had 100% confirmation these things exist. He didn't say that the President Nixon drove me out to a base in Florida, but he told them, don't listen to anybody who says I know for a fact these things exist. That was really cool. Anyway, this is the Wilson memo. You should look into it. That actually came out of when Dr. Edgar Mitchell passed. That leaked out. I think a guy named James Rigney had something to do with it. There's been analysis work on it, but this is considered a smoking gun evidence for crash materials and programs of that nature. There's a guy named Hal Puthoff that's mentioned. Eric Davies is mentioned. Admiral Wilson is mentioned. Quite fascinating. It could be. I think there are other people out there like Richard Dolan and who's the other guy? Ross Coulthart. They know a lot more about this document than I do. But in any case, let's move on. Now you got 1950.
Can I stop you one more time?
Absolutely.
You said Clinton looked into this, but he wasn't happy with the answers he got?
Yes.
How did that go?
What happened was Lawrence Spelman Rockefeller was pressuring the Clinton administration. I know this because I talked to John Podesta about it and other people. And he was basically saying that if you don't push for government transparency on this topic to Clinton, then I'm going to expose the fact that you're not doing it in every newspaper journal across the country. Okay. So Clinton administration goes, okay, fine. What do you want me to do? Which case? Pick a case. And they said, all right, I want you to go after Roswell. So Clinton went after Roswell. They were not happy with the answer they were getting about Roswell. That's that side of the story. I mean, Podesta basically said, yeah, we looked into it. And they eventually came back with that report, Roswell case closed. And they talked about this stupid weather balloon. It was the Project Mogul. Project Mogul is exactly the same damn weather balloon, just a bunch of them strung together. Same excuse, same thing. Anyway, we'll move on. Go to 1950. You've got a couple, I was talking about earlier, Evelyn Trent and her Paul and Evelyn Trent photograph a disc. It's very credible. McMinnville, Oregon, very good case. 52. You've got the 2 consecutive weekends in July of 1952 where you've got UFOs over the White House and UFOs over the Capitol. You have testimony, thank God, to a guy that was in the radar room that night that heard the transmission between the pilots that will scramble to intercept these things. Al Chop, a guy named Tom Tullian of Project Archives, thank God got him on camera. Thank you, Tom. And you get to hear testimony of a guy who's listening to the pilot flying at 500 miles an hour in the pitch black over the Capitol, and he's surrounded by UFOs. And he's radioing back to the tower going, what do I do? And they were all silent. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the Air Force was in full swing. They gave a press conference. It was the biggest press conference since the end of World War II. It was General John Sanford. And he basically says there are credible people making incredible claims, and we don't think that it's us. But the Air Force in 1952 refused to let the public hear the testimony of the pilots. Like, duh. Imagine not hearing from David Fravor. Yeah. How are you supposed to put together a story if you can't hear from that? You got a public, project, Blue Book, and you're not going to share with us? I mean, Ruppelt wrote a book about it. It's amazing. That case in 52 is phenomenal. That's a fantastic case. Jacques Vallée is convinced that they had orders to shoot these things down, that one of them, a piece did fall down and was captured. We had an argument about putting it into the phenomenon, and I ultimately said, Jacques, it's hearsay, I can't do it, and I didn't. But Jacques convinced that we have a piece of that from 52. Fast forward, 1950.
Subscribe to Biggest Influences today.